I will tell you what I thought of him when I first saw him. I thought, this is the man they gave me. He was standing at the far end of the reception corridor on the treaty station, Meridath Conclave, 3 paces behind the diplomatic attaché, who had escorted him up from the shuttle dock. And he was wearing a dark suit that fit him well enough, but carried no rank insignia, no house crest, no color banding that would tell any of my people what he was. He was human. That much was visible from 40 meters. The height, the proportions, the particular quality of stillness that humans have, which is not the stillness of patience, but rather the stillness of something that has simply stopped moving for the moment and reserves the right to start again without announcement. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that had been broken once, I thought, and had healed slightly wrong. His eyes, when they found me across the corridor, were a color I had no precise word for. Not quite gray, not quite green, and they did not linger. They moved on with the same unhurried attention they had given the ceiling ventilation grid, the emergency seal above the inner door, and the 2 Vareth guards standing at parade rest on my left. He catalogued the room. That was what he did. He catalogued it the way you check a garment before putting it on. Methodically, without urgency, and with the private understanding that the information matters, even if no one else thinks it does. I did not know that then. Then, I thought, this is the man they gave me. A human, a functionary from a species that had been in the Galactic registry for less than a century. A creature from a world so recently inducted that half the Conclave's elder chambers still debated whether the induction had been premature. A diplomatic gesture wrapped in a mediocre suit sent to stand beside me at the Conclave's most politically dangerous convening in 40 years, and to be, by the terms of the treaty, my consort, my husband. I am telling you this so you understand what I was, before I understood what he was. The Vareth sovereignty had signed the consort treaty with the Terran Federated Worlds 14 months earlier. My mother, the sovereign, had been pragmatic about it. The Terrans controlled 3 relay stations in the mid-corridor approach to our home system. Those relay stations were not militarily significant on their own, but they sat astride a navigational channel that any hostile force would have to use. The Drath Combine had been pressing our southern boundary for 11 years. We needed the mid-corridor approach clean. The Terrans wanted a formal alliance anchor. My mother gave them the anchor. She gave them me. I accepted it, the way I accepted most things my mother arranged, with the clear-eyed recognitions that sentiment was a luxury the sovereignty could not presently afford, and with the private reservation that I would conduct myself with perfect correctness toward whatever human they assigned, and that I would never permit myself to feel anything about it one way or another. Then saw Hums and felt contempt, and I am not proud of that. His name was Callum Reese. The attaché introduced him using a Terran honorific I did not recognize. Not a military rank, not a diplomatic grade, something older and more specific. I would learn its meaning later. At the time I received it as I received the rest of him, as information I did not need to process deeply. He bowed. It was a correct bow, the correct depth, the correct duration, the hands placed precisely as Vareth protocol required. He had been briefed well, I noted. He came up from it and met my eyes without the flinching uncertainty that most humans showed in close proximity to a Vareth of the royal line. We are taller than humans. Our eyes refract light differently. There is a quality to the gold of Vareth eyes that many species find unsettling up, close, something in the frequency. He looked at me the way he had looked at the ventilation grid, with attention, without performance. Your radiance, he said. His voice was low and even, and he did not fill the silence after it with reassurances or pleasantries. Consort Reese, I said, and I turned away. The Conclave of Meridath convenes once every 4 years aboard the treaty station of the same name, which hangs in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant Velthoroth, tethered by a single orbital anchor to a captured moonlet. 12 sovereign powers send their primary diplomatic delegations. The agenda is always the same: boundary confirmation, trade corridor allocation, and the resolution of any treaty violations accumulated in the preceding cycle. The proceedings last 9 days. By tradition, all delegations are housed on station for the duration. This Sal's conclave was the most contested in my lifetime. The Drath Combine's expansion into the Pelavar Reach had strained 4 separate boundary agreements. Warlord Thanix Kovur had not come to the previous conclave. He had sent a deputy. He came to this one himself, which told you everything you needed to know about what he intended. He was a large male, by Drath standards, which meant he was enormous by any standard. 2.5 meters. Shoulders built for armor, a face that had been scarred by something that melted stone, and the calm of a creature that had never, in its adult life, encountered a situation it considered genuinely threatening. He wore the Combine's military dress, which was a deep arterial red, and he wore it as though the conclave chamber were a conquered territory, and the dress were proof of it. He saw me on the first day of proceedings, in the outer reception hall, and his eyes moved to Callum standing 2 paces behind my left shoulder, and he smiled. It was the smile of a male who has just been handed an advantage he had not expected. I felt it. I did not show it. The first session was procedural. Boundary confirmations, logged objections, a minor trade dispute between the Harvan Compact and the Iresi Brotherhood that required a mediating statement from the chair. Callum sat to my left at the Vareth delegation table. Consorts were given formal seating in conclave proceedings. It was protocol, and he was quiet for the full 4 hours. He had a tablet in front of him. He appeared to be reading. I noticed during a recess that the document on his tablet was the full text of the boundary dispute between the Drath Combine and the Pelavar Reach claimants, annotated in a hand I could not read from my angle. He had printed it, physically printed it, and made notes in the margins. I did not know what to make of that, so I did not make anything of it. The second session was the first of the substantive proceedings, and Kovur opened it by raising a point of order. He stood. He did not wait to be recognized, simply stood, and the chamber gave way to him, the way water gives way to something dropped into it. And he said, in the formal conclave register, that he wished to address the matter of delegation composition. The chair, an elderly Harvan diplomat named Sorrel, asked him to specify. Kovur specified. It has come to the Combine's attention, they said, that the Vareth sovereignty has seated a non-diplomat in a formal delegation position, a consort, a human. He said the word with a particular quality, not a slur exactly, but the tone you use when identifying something that has wandered into the wrong room. The conclave charter is clear on delegation composition. Formal seats are reserved for accredited diplomatic personnel. I am asking the chair to confirm that the human seat is a courtesy accommodation, with no voting weight, no speaking right, and no formal standing. There was a silence in the chamber. Then several heads turned toward me. I was about to respond. I had the words prepared. I had anticipated something like this. Kovur was not subtle. When Callum spoke, he did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He said from his seat in perfect formal conclave register, Warlord Kovur's concern is noted. For the record, I hold a Grade 7 diplomatic commission from the Terran Federated Worlds, issued under the Meridath Accords Supplementary Protocol, which predates the current charter by 11 years. The protocol grants full delegation standing to any signatory power consort accredited under a ratified treaty. The consort treaty between the Vareth sovereignty and the Terran Federated Worlds is a ratified treaty. My standing is not a courtesy. He looked back at his tablet. Kovur had not expected that. I watched the calculation move across his face. A recalibration, swift and not entirely concealed. The Grade 7 Commission, Kovur said, is a clerical accreditation. It grants standing to process documents and observe proceedings. It does not grant the standing of a senior diplomat. You're correct, Callum said, still looking at his tablet. However, the supplementary protocol does not specify grade. It specifies ratified commission. I have one. Sorrel, the chair, cleared his throat and asked the chamber's legal registrar to confirm. There was a pause of approximately 4 minutes while the registrar pulled records. Then the registrar confirmed, in the dry tone of someone delivering information he had not been asked to hold an opinion on, that the supplementary protocol did indeed apply, and that the commission was valid, and that consort Reese held full formal standing. Cover sat down. I looked at Callum. He was making a note in the margin of his printed document. I did not say anything to him during the midday recess. I was trying to decide what had just happened. He had known about the supplementary protocol. He had known about it before Cover raised the point of order, which meant he had anticipated the challenge, which meant he had prepared. I sat with that information over the midday meal in the Verith delegation's private dining room, and I found that it made me uneasy in a way I could not precisely name. My senior attaché, a woman named Harith Doss, who had been serving the Sovereignty's diplomatic corps for 30 years, sat down beside me and said quietly, "He knew." "Yes," I said. "He had it in his notes," she said. "The supplementary protocol reference. He had it written out in full. He was ready before the session started." I looked at her. She was not a woman who expressed surprise easily. "Find out," I said, "what else he has in his notes." She came to me that evening with a careful expression and said that she had asked Callum directly, because she was Harith Doss and that was how she operated, and that he had shown her his file. "How much?" I asked. "Complete delegation dossiers on all 12 powers," she said. "Position papers on every agenda item. The full history of the Drath Combine's boundary violations, sourced and annotated, going back 8 years. The text of every treaty currently in force at this conclave, including 3 supplementary protocols that I did not know existed." She paused. "He also has a security assessment. A security assessment of the station. Entry points, choke points, the emergency seal sequences, approximate response times for each delegation security personnel." She paused again. "And ours." I was quiet for a moment. "He assessed our security." "He did." She looked at me with the expression she reserved for information that required me to update a prior position. "He found 2 gaps. He left a note with suggested remedies. It was courteous, the note. I told her to implement the remedies. Then I sat alone for a while, with the understanding that I had been married for 14 months to a man I had never bothered to look at. On the 3rd day, Cover moved his campaign from procedural to personal. It was done in the social sessions. The conclave had formal proceedings in the mornings and structured social engagements in the afternoons, during which delegations were expected to mix, to consolidate relationships, to conduct the informal work of diplomacy. Cover circulated with his senior aide and made remarks. The remarks were about Callum. They were not crude. Cover was many things, but he was not crude. They were the kind of remarks that require an audience of a particular sophistication to fully appreciate. Observations about the Terran Federated World's place in the Galactic Order, about the brevity of their recorded history, about the particular qualities of species that had arrived recently and had not yet learned, as he put it, which rooms they belonged in. He would deliver these observations with his eyes resting on Callum just long enough to make the target clear, and then he would move on, leaving the implication in the air to settle where it would. Callum heard every word. I watched him hear it. He was standing near a window that looked out over the gas giant's upper cloud layer. Enormous amber brown, whorls the size of continents, revolving slowly below the station, and he had a glass of water in his hand, and he was watching the clouds. When Cover's remarks reached him, he did not react. He kept watching the clouds. At one point, Cover crossed the room and stood near him and said, in a lower register but still audible, that it must be a remarkable experience for a human to stand in a chamber like this, to see what the older species had built, to be permitted to observe. Callum turned from the window and looked at Cover. "The cloud formations are extraordinary," Callum said. "That band there, the dark one, the third from the outer edge. Do you see how it's rotating counter to the others? Something's disrupting the thermal layer underneath it. I've been trying to work out what." He looked back at the clouds. Cover stared at him for a moment. Then he moved away. I was standing 12 meters away, and I had heard all of it. and I cannot tell you exactly what I felt. I know that I had expected Callum to say something defensive, or to deflect, or to show some sign that the remark had landed. And he had not. He had said something entirely true about the cloud formations. I checked later, and he was right about the thermal disruption. And he had said it without any audible subtext. And Cover had not known what to do with that. It occurred to me, standing there, that I also did not know what to do with that. I stayed in the reception for another hour, performing the correct social work. Speaking with the Harvan Compact's trade representative, exchanging formal courtesies with the Iresi Brotherhood's delegation head, deflecting 2 inquiries from minor delegations that were attempting to read the sovereignty's positioning on the reclassification question. I was composed. I was correct. I was doing what I had been trained to do since I was old enough to understand what a conclave was. But I was watching Callum, and I was doing it without meaning to. He moved through the room the way he did everything, without urgency, without performance. He spoke when spoken to, which was not often. When he spoke, he was brief and direct and said nothing that could be used. He accepted a second glass of water from a station steward and thanked the steward by name, which meant he had learned the station staff's names at some point, which meant he had been paying attention to the people in this room that no one else paid attention to. I noticed 3 other small things over the course of the hour. That when the Iresi Brotherhood's security attaché crossed the room behind him, Callum's posture changed very slightly. Not a flinch. Nothing visible, unless you were watching for it. Just a marginal adjustment of weight and angle, that when the station's internal communication channel emitted a burst of data traffic. A soft tone that most people didn't consciously register. He paused his conversation and listened to the tone for half a second before continuing, and that when Kabur drew a private remark to his senior aide at the far end of the room, behind 2 layers of ambient conversation, Callum's gaze moved briefly in that direction and then away. I did not know what those things meant. I knew that they meant something. That evening, for the first time, I sought him out. He was in the delegation's shared observation lounge, which was empty at that hour. The gas giant filled the primary viewport. It was the size of the sky back home, and lit from within by its own slow chemistry, amber and copper, and a deep bruised red where the storm systems ran. He was sitting in a chair angled toward the viewport with a cup of something hot, and his annotated documents spread across the side table. I sat in the chair across from him. He looked at me and waited. You anticipated Cover's procedural challenge, I said. I anticipated some version of it, yes. How? His public record. The Combine's delegation, at the last 3 conclaves, challenged the standing of at least one smaller power's delegate in the first 2 sessions. It's a pattern. It establishes dominance early and forces the chair to adjudicate something, which takes time and disrupts the session's momentum. He'd have used anything available. A consort with an unclear commission was available. You prepared a counter. I prepared several counters, he said. That was the simplest. I looked at him for a moment. The light from the gas giant moved slowly across his face. The others, I said. What were they? He looked at me and something shifted slightly in his expression. Not a smile, not quite. Something more private than that. Depends on what he tried, he said. I had options for a direct commission challenge, for a procedural motion to exclude non-voting delegates, and for a floor motion to revisit the supplementary protocols entirely. The last one would have been messy. I preferred the simple answer. Why didn't you tell me you had prepared these? He looked at the gas giant for a moment. You didn't ask, he said, and I wasn't sure you'd want to know. I stayed with that for a long time after I went to my quarters. I stayed with the fact that he had understood, without being told, that I had not wanted to think about him, that I had kept a careful distance from the fact of him, had processed him as an inconvenient political attachment, had declined to look at him with any real attention. And he had known that, and had gone ahead and prepared anyway, and had not presumed to inform me of it. He had simply been ready. I am not a sentimental person. I want to be clear about that. I was raised in a court where sentiment was a texture laid over calculation, and I had learned early to look for the calculation underneath. But I sat in my quarters on the third night of the conclave of Meridath, and I thought, I have been wrong about this man. Not in the small way of a minor misunderstanding, wrong in the larger way that requires you to go back and revise everything you thought you knew. On the fourth day, I began, carefully, to pay attention. I watched how he moved through the morning session. Still, mostly, he made notes. He listened to the boundary confirmation proceedings with a quality of attention that looked like inattention if you didn't know what you were looking at. The head slightly lowered, the eyes not tracking the speaker, the pen making occasional marks. But which was, I realized after an hour, the posture of someone who has already read the documents and is checking the spoken record for discrepancies. Twice I watched him make a note immediately after a delegation representative said something, and twice, when I looked at the document later during recess, the notes were flags, a date that didn't match the treaty text, a boundary marker designation that the representative had given in the wrong grid system. Small things. The kind of thing a tired registrar might catch eventually, or might not. He caught them immediately. He said nothing about them to anyone. He simply noted them. During the afternoon social session on the fourth day, I positioned myself near enough to observe him when the Harvan Compact's trade delegation head, a man named Sorvin, engaged him in conversation. Sorvin was not an enemy. The Compact and the Sovereignty had good relations, but he was the kind of diplomat who asks questions with the texture of small talk because small talk is easier to answer carelessly. I watched Callum answer Sorvin's questions, brief, direct, accurate, and giving away absolutely nothing that was not already public record. He was pleasant about it. He smiled, occasionally, at the right moments. Sorvin came away from the conversation visibly satisfied, and I thought, he gave Sorvin nothing, and Sorvin doesn't know it. I thought, this man has been doing this, somewhere, for a very long time. On the fifth day, Kovur moved his campaign from remarks to maneuver. He filed a formal motion with the conclave chair, requesting an extraordinary session on the matter of the Drath Combine's proposed reclassification of 3 Pelavar Reach sectors as contested navigational space. The reclassification was, in conclave terms, a legal fiction. The sectors in question were under Harvan Compact settlement and had been for 60 years, but the Combine had constructed a technical argument for the reclassification that was just plausible enough to require a response, and the motion forced every other delegation to either oppose it formally or be recorded as abstaining. The Vareth Sovereignty had a direct interest. 2 of the 3 sectors sat along our mid-corridor approach, the PSIS approach that the Terran relay stations protected. If the sectors were reclassified, the Combine would have nominal claim to navigational priority. The relay stations would become legally irrelevant. The Terran Federated Worlds had the same interest, from the other direction. Callum came to my suite that evening with a document. He stood at the door and held it out and said, "Opposition filing, if you want it." I took it and read it. It was 11 pages. It addressed every element of the Combine's technical argument, point by point, with sourced counter-argument. It preempted 3 of the anticipated supporting moves from Combine-aligned delegations. It proposed a counter-resolution that would formalize the Harvan Compact's settlement rights in a way that would be difficult to revisit for at least 2 conclave cycles. I read it twice. "When did you write this?" I asked. "I had the structure ready from the second day," he said. "I finished the sourcing tonight. This is a strong filing. It's accurate," he said. "That's the main thing." I looked up from the document at him. He was standing in the doorway. He had not come in, had waited to be invited. And the corridor light was behind him, and he had the look of a man who had been awake for a while and did not mind it. "Come in," I said. He came in and sat, and we worked on the filing together for 3 hours. It was the first real work I had done with him, and I will tell you that it was not what I had expected. He was precise. He was fast. He did not argue for the pleasure of arguing. When he disagreed with my suggestions, He said directly and explained why, and when my reasoning was better, he acknowledged it without making a thing of it. He had a quality of mind that I recognized, having been trained in it myself. The ability to hold several competing arguments in attention simultaneously and assess them against each other, without losing the thread. At one point, he found a gap in the settlement rights sourcing, a secondary record from a border survey 43 years ago that contradicted one of our cited dates by a margin that was small but exploitable. He flagged it, spent 12 minutes finding the primary record that superseded the secondary, cited the primary, and moved on, all without breaking the rhythm of the conversation. I watched him do it. I watched the speed and the certainty of it, and I thought about what it takes to move like that through a document. The years of it, the particular discipline of knowing where to look and trusting what you find. "Where did you train?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Several places," he said. "I'm not sure any of them have a specific name that would translate." "You're a diplomat," I said. "Your commission is grade 7, but you're not a grade 7 diplomat." He looked at me. That not quite smile again. "No," he said. "What are you?" "I'm your consort," he said. "For purposes of this conclave." I held his gaze for a moment. He held mine with the same quality he brought to everything. Complete, unhurried, without performance. "For purposes of this conclave," I repeated. "Yes." I did not push further. There were things I was not yet ready to ask, and I think he knew that, because he looked back at the filing and said, "The third counter-argument. I think we can sharpen the sourcing on the navigational priority clause. Can I show you?" I said yes. On the 6th day we filed the opposition jointly, under both our names, as Vareth Sovereignty and Terran Federated Worlds co-signatories. That evening we watched the gas giant together for the first time. I had said I wanted to, and he had said he would like that. And when the formal evening meal was finished and the other delegation members had retired, I went to the observation lounge. And he was already there, in his chair, the viewport full of amber and copper, and the deep turning bruise of the lower storm systems. I sat across from him, and for a while neither of us spoke, and the silence was a different kind of silence than the ones we had maintained across the conclave's previous 5 days. Not the silence of two people avoiding a subject, but the silence of two people looking at the same thing. The gas giant, at that hour, was lit from its own interior processes in a way that was difficult to describe. The cloud bands moved slowly enough that you could not see the motion directly. You could only look away and then look back and perceive that something had changed, the way you cannot see a minute hand move but can see that it has. The dark band was there, as it always was, and its edge was doing the slow work of dissolution. "What's underneath it?" I asked. "When the upper band finally absorbs, what's below?" "Another band," he said. "A lighter one. The storm systems at that depth run in the opposite direction from the ones above. When the absorption happens, the two systems will interact. You'll get a period of turbulence along the boundary, 3 or 4 months of it, and then the lighter band will reorganize, and the whole sequence will start again. It's been doing this for a long time, probably since the planet formed," he said. "Millions of years, the same pattern, repeating. The station's long-range atmospheric records go back about 400 years, and the pattern is consistent throughout." I thought about that. 400 years of records. The planet itself immeasurably older, going about its chemistry, without any record at all, without needing one. "Do you do this wherever you go?" I said. "Find something to watch." He looked at me. "What do you mean?" "You were watching the ventilation grid when you arrived," I said. "The first day. And the emergency seals. And the staffing patterns. And the cloud formations." I looked at him steadily. "You're always watching something." He was quiet for a moment. "I suppose I am," he said. "What are you looking for?" He considered the question with the same attention he brought to everything. Not defensively, not with the particular self-awareness that makes people careful about what they reveal, but with what seemed to be genuine thought. "Patterns," he said. "Things that are behaving differently than they usually behave. Things that have been present for a long time and are about to change." He looked at the gas giant. The ventilation space seal on the third panel that was newer than the others. Someone had opened it recently. That's worth knowing. In a room where a delegation is about to be present. The emergency seals. The activation sequence on the inner door is different from the outer, which means one of them was installed under a different contractor, which means the response times are different. Also worth knowing. And the clouds. The corner of his mouth moved. The clouds are just beautiful, he said. Some things you watch because they're worth watching. I looked at him. I thought about Vareth's words from the following day. They had not happened yet, but I had been thinking along the same lines for days. The quality of a man who has decided that being visible is a choice. I thought about how he had moved through the entire conclave, present in every room, noticed by almost no one, carrying more than anyone in the room understood. What rooms have you been in? I said. Before this one. He looked at the gas giant for a long moment. Many, he said. Before you were a consort. Before and after are not as distinct as you might think, he said. The work is similar. You read the room. You find the thing that matters. You try to make the right move at the right time and not before. And the Terran honorific, I said. The one the attaché used when he introduced you. I looked it up. He waited. It's an old designation, I said. From before the Terran Federated Worlds was a formal entity. From a period when your people were managing certain kinds of problems through certain kinds of people who were not officially acknowledged to exist. He held my gaze with complete steadiness. Yes, he said. And those people, after formal entry into the Galactic Registry, were not all reassigned to clerical roles. No, he said. Not all of them. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked back at the gas giant. You didn't tell me, I said. You didn't ask, he said. The same answer as before, and just as direct. And it wasn't relevant to the work here. It was relevant to understanding what you were capable of. You didn't need to know what I was capable of, he said. You needed to know whether I was trustworthy. Those are different questions. The first one you answer by watching someone work. The second one you answer by watching how they conduct themselves when they think no one is watching. I thought about that. And which were you doing? I asked. When I wasn't watching. The same thing I do when you are, he said. The work. The gas giant moved in its patient way, and the dark band spread its slow edge, and I sat with the fact of him. This human, this quiet and precisely capable man who had been beside me for 14 months and whom I had declined to see, and I thought about the particular quality of what had been lost in those months and what perhaps was not too late to recover. Tomorrow, I said, he'll move on the treaty. Yes, he said. You're ready. We're ready, he said. I looked at him. He was looking at the clouds. Yes, I said, we are. The Chamber's reaction to the joint filing was interesting. I watched it from my seat during the morning session as the registrar entered it into the record. A small reconfiguration across several delegations, a few quick consultations, the particular quality of attention that appears in a room when something unexpected has happened and everyone is trying to recalibrate. Simultaneously, Kovur read the filing during the recess. I watched him read it. He read it twice, as I had. Then he looked across the chamber at Callum. And his expression was not the tolerant contempt of the earlier days. It was something else, something tighter. Callum was making a note in his margin. On the 7th day, Kovur escalated. He had a second motion, a surprise motion, filed the night before with the minimum required notice, calling for a full chamber vote on the legitimacy of the consort treaty itself. His argument was narrow but constructed with care. The treaty had been ratified under a specific provision of the mid-corridor agreements, and that provision, he now argued, had contained a procedural defect at the time of its original passage. If the defect was upheld, the treaty was voidable. If the treaty was voidable, Callum's commission was invalidated. If his commission was invalidated, the joint filing was removed from the record. It was elegant. I will give Kovur that. He had been building to this for 7 days. The chamber convened for the extraordinary session at the 2nd hour of the morning. Callum had read the motion, We had both been notified at the same time, and he had come to my suite at the first hour with a document. He was not anxious. He did not appear to be anxious. He appeared to be the same as he always was, composed, unhurried, the document in his hand, and the same quality of readiness that I had been watching all week. "He's right about the defect," Callum said, sitting across from me. There was a procedural irregularity in the original passage, a quorum certification that was filed 4 hours late. That voids the treaty. It gives grounds for a challenge. Whether it voids, it depends on how the Chamber rules on the doctrine of ratification by subsequent conduct, which is the argument that a treaty with a procedural defect at passage is nonetheless valid if both parties have acted under it in good faith for an extended period. 14 months of conduct on both sides. He looked at me. The sovereignty has been acting under this treaty for 14 months. The Terran Federated Worlds has been acting under this treaty for 14 months. The question is whether the Chamber accepts subsequent conduct as healing the defect. And if they don't, then the treaty is void, my commission is void, the filing is struck, and you argue the opposition to Kovur's reclassification motion alone without Terran co-signature. He paused. Which is a weaker position? Can we win on subsequent conduct? Yes, he said. But I'm not going to argue it. I looked at him. The subsequent conduct argument is defensible, he said. But it's reactive. It concedes that the defect exists and asks for mercy. I don't want to ask for mercy. He set a page on the table between us. The late quorum certifications was flagged at the time by the Mid-Corridor Agreements Committee. 3 days after the flag, the committee chair issued a written waiver, understanding authority, on the grounds that all parties had confirmed attendance and the delay was clerical. The waiver is in the record. It was just never cited because the defect was never challenged. I looked at the page. The waiver was there. A single paragraph, dated, signed, recorded in the committee's formal minutes. So the defect was cured at the time, I said. The defect was cured at the time, he said. Kovur didn't know about the waiver. His legal team found the certification flag, but stopped there. He looked at me steadily. Or they found the waiver and decided the Chamber wouldn't look far enough back to find it. And you found it. I found it on the second day, he said. It was in the supplementary records, not indexed. You'd have to know what you were looking for. I was quiet for a moment. Why were you looking for it on the second day? I asked. Because I thought he might come after the treaty itself eventually, Callum said. It was the cleanest angle. I wanted to know if it was bulletproof before I had to defend it. He said it simply. No drama, no pride in it. The way you report a thing you checked because it was your job to check it. I looked at him across the table in the early morning light, with the gas giant bright and steady in the viewport behind him, and I thought, this man has been carrying this conclave for 7 days, and I did not know it. He has been carrying it the way a good structure carries weight. Invisibly, without complaint, without requiring anyone to notice. I thought about the question I had asked him on the third night. What are you? I'm your consort, he had said. For purposes of this conclave, I understood now what he had meant by that. Not evasion, precision. He was telling me what he had chosen to be in this room, in this time, not what his history was, not what his other names were, what he had decided to do with himself, here, beside me. How do you want to handle the session? I said. I'll let them run their argument, he said. When they've finished, I'll put the waiver in the record. I'd like to do it without commentary. No speech. No speech, he said. The document speaks. The extraordinary session ran for 2 hours. Kovur's legal representative presented the challenge with considerable skill. The procedural defect was real. The argument was coherent, and several delegations were visibly weighing the political implications. The Harvin chair, Sorrel, listened with the patience of a man who has seen a great many maneuvers in his time. I presented the sovereignty's initial response, which was measured and did not reveal anything. Callum sat beside me and made no indication, during the entire 2 hours, that anything was about to happen. When Kovur's representative finished, Sorrel asked if there were any further submissions before the chamber moved to deliberation. Callum said yes. He stood. The first time he had stood to speak in the full chamber, and he submitted the waiver to the registrar and asked that it be read into the register record. The registrar read it. The room changed. It is a particular thing, the silence that falls in a chamber of 12 sovereign delegations when a certainty dissolves. It is not the silence of shock. Shock is too fast, too loud in its own way. But this was slower. This was the silence of recalibration, of people updating models, of the careful political machinery that fills a room like that catching a gear it had not expected to catch. Cover's representative tried to argue that the waiver's authority was questionable. Callum cited the relevant standing provision, from memory, with the article and subsection numbers. The representative tried a secondary argument about the waiver's scope. Callum cited the committee chair's documented authority, with the date of delegation and the original instrument of authority. The representative stopped. Sorrels looked at Cover. Cover was looking at Callum. His expression, for the first time in 7 days, was unreadable. Sorrel said, in the dry tone of someone closing a door that had been opened unnecessarily, that the challenge to the consort treaty was without merit, that the treaty was valid, that the commission was valid, and that the joint filing stood. He asked the chamber to proceed to substantive deliberation on the original reclassification motion. Callum sat down. He opened his document and made a note in the margin. I watched the room around us. I watched the Aresi Brotherhood's senior diplomat lean over to her attaché and say something quiet. I watched the Harvan Compact's legal registrar make a notation that I thought, from the movement of his pen, was a cross-reference to the supplementary protocol citation from day one. I watched 3 delegations that had been nominally aligned with the Combine in the earlier proceedings shift their physical orientation. Small things, the angle of a chair, the direction of an attaché's attention, in ways that were not small at all. And I watched Cover. Cover was still looking at Callum, and the thing in his face was not anger. It was a reappraisal. He was looking at Callum the way you look at something you believed to be one kind of object and have discovered to be another kind entirely. I had felt that particular reappraisal myself over the past 4 days, and I recognized it in his face, and the recognition carried with it a complicated private feeling that I did not examine closely there in the chamber, but that I knew I would need to examine later. I thought, yes, now you see it. Now you see what has been sitting beside me for 7 days. The chamber broke for midday recess, and we returned to the delegation suite, and Harith Doss was waiting with the alert expression of someone who has observed the morning's proceedings and has things to say. I stopped her. In a moment, I said. I turned to Callum. He was setting his document on the side table and looked up when I turned, and the afternoon light from the viewport was the amber of the gas giant reflected through the transparency, and it made the gray in his hair look like it had been there always, like it was part of the structure of him. The waiver, I said. You found it on the 2nd day. Yes, and you held it. I held it, he said, because I didn't want to use it unless I had to, revealing a counter that early would have told him how thoroughly we'd prepared. Better to let him think the angle was clean and let him commit to it. I looked at him for a long moment. We, I said. He looked back at me. He had said it without thinking, I believed. Or perhaps he had said it with full thought, which is also a kind of not thinking. He had said it because it was accurate. Because for 7 days he had been working toward the same outcome I had been working toward, through means I had not known about, without requiring me to know about them, and he had thought of it as the same work. Yes, he said simply, and waited. I had prepared remarks somewhere in the previous 48 hours, remarks about the treaty and its terms and the formal acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. They were correct remarks. They were the sort of thing you say when a political situation has resolved favorably. I did not say them. The cloud formation, I said. The dark band. The one you were watching on the 3rd day. He blinked very slightly. It was the closest thing to surprised I had seen on his face. The thermal disruption, I said. Did you work out what was causing it? After a moment, he said, a density gradient in the underlying layer. There's a current reversal about 800 kilometers down. The upper band's read as stable, but if you watch the edge of the dark band, you can see the instability propagating outward. It'll absorb the adjacent band in about 6 months. The pattern then resets. He paused. I've been watching it every evening, he said. It's a remarkable thing to watch. I would like to watch it with you, I said, this evening. The thing that was not quite a smile appeared on his face, and this time it went further than it had before. Not a full smile, not the kind of smile that requires anything of the person receiving it, just a quality of presence, of a door being left ajar. I'd like that, he said. Let me tell you what happened to Cover's reclassification motion. It failed. It failed in the formal vote on the 8th day, 11 delegations against, 1 abstaining. This abstention was the Drath Combine. Kovur did not speak during the vote. He entered his abstention, collected his delegation, and left the session with the composure of a man who has recalibrated privately and intends to make no further moves that can be recorded. In the days that followed, speaking with other delegation heads, off the formal record, in the social sessions, over the kind of conversation that is the real work of a conclave, I was asked about Callum several times, not in the way they had asked about him earlier, with the particular careful neutrality that is itself a dismissal. In a different way, with the careful attention you give to information you have updated and are not entirely sure what to do with yet. The Iresi Brotherhood's senior diplomat, a woman named Vareth, who had been at conclaves longer than I had been alive, sat with me on the final evening and said, "Your consort." "Yes," I said. "He's been here before," she said. Not a question. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about what I knew and what I had inferred and what I was still in the process of understanding. "I think," I said, "that he has been in rooms like this before." "Yes," Vareth nodded slowly. "He has the quality," she said, "of a man who has decided that being visible is a choice, not a condition." I held that for a moment. Then I said, "Yes, that's exactly right." She looked at me with the expression of someone who has watched many things over many years and has learned to recognize certain shapes when they appear. "He chose to stand beside you," she said. "Yes," I said. Quietly, she said, "Yes." She nodded once, as if confirming something she had already decided, and changed the subject, and I sat with it for the rest of the evening and most of the night afterward. He chose to stand beside me, quietly, with the full weight of everything he was, which was a considerable weight, held in reserve and used only when it was needed and not a moment before. I thought about the word I had used in my own mind on the first day. Worthless. I had not said it aloud. I had not even fully shaped it into a thought. But it had been there, underneath my correct behavior and my precise courtesy, the assumption that ran below my deliberate fairness. This is not a person I need to take seriously. This is a gesture, a diplomatic attachment, a human. I had been wrong with the totality of the word. On the final morning of the conclave, before the closing ceremonies, I went to find him. He was in the observation lounge again. The same chair, angled toward the viewport, the document on the side table. The gas giant was in the early light, different colors than the evenings. Pale gold and cream at the top of the cloud layers, the amber deeper below, and the dark band still there, its edge still moving in the slow pattern he had described, the instability propagating outward toward the adjacent band. I sat in the chair across from him. He looked at me and waited, as he always did. I thought about the things I wanted to say. There were many of them, and they were not all simple. There was the formal acknowledgement. The conclave had been a success. The joint filing had held. The sovereignty's interests had been protected. There was the personal acknowledgement, the harder one, the one that required me to say directly that I had been wrong, and in what specific ways. There was the question I still had not asked, the one about what he was before he was my consort, what rooms he had been in and under what names. I was not ready for all of it. I knew that. He had been patient with my not readiness for 14 months. I thought he would continue to be patient. The closing ceremony is at the 3rd hour, I said. Yes. I would like you to walk in with me, I said. Not 2 paces behind. Beside me. He looked at me. The morning light from the gas giant was the color of old gold, and it was steady on his face, and he had the look of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has been asked Empress to set it down. Beside you, he said. Beside me. He was quiet for a moment. The dark band, he said. Look at it this morning. I turned and looked at the viewport. The band was there, that deep bruised darkness against the gold of the upper atmosphere, and its edge was doing the thing he had described. A slow, almost imperceptible spreading, the instability passing outward into the adjacent layer. It's closer, I said, than it was last evening. It moves faster in the mornings, he said. I haven't worked out why yet. The thermal gradient should be consistent, but there's something in the morning readings that accelerates it. He said it with the quality of genuine interest. Not performance, not deflection. A real puzzle that had his attention, I thought. This is who he is. A man who looks at things, who makes notes in margins, who finds the waver in the unsighted record and holds it until it is needed, who stands in a corridor full of contempt and watches a cloud formation with complete sincerity, who has been, for 14 months, fully present at a distance I chose to keep him at, and who accepted that distance and worked within it, and never once asked me to close it before I was ready. Will you watch it with me again tonight? I said, when we're back. He looked at me, and the door that had been left ajar opened a little further. Yes, he said. We stood together for the closing ceremony. I want to tell you what the chamber looked like, because I want you to understand that it was not a small room, and it was not a small gathering. 12 sovereign powers, their full delegations, the conclave staff, the legal registrars, the chair and his deputies, perhaps 300 beings in a space designed to carry the weight of decisions that shaped navigational corridors and trade agreements, and boundary lines that would stand for 4 years, and then be renegotiated and stand again. The formal columns of the Meridath's station's central hall, which were old. Older than the current station, salvaged from the original structure and reinstalled because the conclave's founders had believed that certain things should endure, rose to a ceiling that was transparent, and through it the gas giant was visible in its full morning face, an enormous patient presence of amber and gold. Callum stood beside me. He did not perform the standing. He simply stood, with the quality of presence he always had, composed, unhurried, watching the proceedings with the same attention he gave to everything. I was aware of him, the way you become aware of something that has always been there, but that you have only recently begun to properly perceive. Warmth at the edge of attention, steady and reliable and real in a way that is distinct from reliability performed. I was aware that Kovur saw him, that Kovur looked at him, not with contempt, not with the earlier calculation, but with something that was perhaps the beginning of a more accurate assessment, and then looked away. I was aware that Vareth, across the chamber, caught my eye and held it for a moment before nodding, very slightly as if completing a thought she had begun the night before. Sorrel delivered the closing statement, as conclave chairs do, a formal summation of the cycle's resolutions, the confirmed boundaries, the trade corridor allocations, the outstanding matters to be carried forward. He named the successful opposition to the reclassification motion. He named the joint filing. He said in the measured tone of a man who chooses his words with full awareness of what they cost, that the conclave's work had been accomplished with notable skill by several delegations, and that the record would reflect this. He did not say Callum's name aloud. The record would. But Sorrel was the kind of man who understood what went into a record and what was better left to resonate in the room itself, and what he said in the room, in the particular weight of that sentence and the direction of his attention as he said. It was sufficient. It was more than sufficient. It was the kind of acknowledgement that a certain sort of person recognizes immediately, and that others miss entirely, and Callum was exactly the kind of person who recognized it. I saw it in the slight change in his stillness, not movement, not a reaction, you could point to, just a fractional settling, as though something had been received and filed away in the place where that kind of thing is kept. Afterward, in the corridor, walking toward the departure bay, Callum was quiet for a time. Then he said, "That went well." "Yes," I said. "The counter-resolution will hold for 2 cycles, I think. The boundary confirmation language is tight, and the Harvan Compact settlement rights are formalized now in a way that will be difficult to revisit without triggering a much broader review." "Yes," I said. "You built it well." He looked at the corridor ahead of us. "We built it well," he said. I let that stand. Near the departure bay, there was a viewport. Smaller than the observation lounges, just a rectangular panel in the corridor wall. And through it the gas giant was, visible at its full morning depth, the upper atmosphere bright and the lower layers carrying their slow-moving storms. I stopped at it for a moment. "The dark band," I said. He stopped beside me. We both looked. The band was there. Its edge had moved further since morning, measurably further, visibly further. And the adjacent layer was beginning to show the first disturbance at its border, the faint roughening that precedes absorption. "Months," I said. "6," he said, "give or take, and then it resets, and then it resets." I looked at it for a moment longer. Then I looked at him. Beside me, steady, watching the slow, patient movement of a system that did not need anyone to notice it in order to proceed, but that was nonetheless worth noticing. "Callum," I said. He looked at me. There was more I had not yet said. There were the questions I had not yet asked, and the acknowledgments I had not yet made, and the months of distance I had not yet closed. I knew that. He knew that. We were both, I thought, people who understood that certain things take the time they take, and that the patience required for them is not a failing but a form of respect for what they are. "Thank you," I said, "for what you did here." He held my gaze with that unhurried quality, that complete attention. "You held the treaty," he said. "You stood in front of this chamber for 9 days, and you gave the sovereignty everything it needed. I was useful, but the ground was yours." It was the most he had said, in one breath, about the work between us. I thought about the first day, when he had stood at the end of the corridor in his unremarkable suit, and I had thought, "This is the man they gave me." How precisely wrong I had been. How much the error had cost me, in those 14 months, in not looking at him, in not asking, in treating the fact of him as a condition to be managed rather than a person to be known. "When we return," I said, "I would like to begin again." He was quiet for a moment. "Begin," he said. "Start over," I said. "Ask the questions I should have asked. Have the conversations I should have had." I looked at him. "I would like to know you, if you're willing." He looked at the gas giant for a moment. The amber light moved in slow, patient rolls across the glass. "I've been here the whole time," he said. It was not a reproach. It was simply true, and he said it the way he said true things, without performance, without requiring anything from it. Just the fact, offered. "I know," I said. "I know you have." And I stopped. Started again. I was not paying attention. That is on me. And I would like to pay attention now. He looked at me. The door was fully open now, I thought. Or perhaps what I was seeing was not a door at all, but the quality of a man who had never closed one, who had simply waited, with complete patience, for the person beside him to be ready to walk through. "Yes," he said. "I'm willing." We stood at the viewport a little longer, watching the gas giant turn, and then we walked together toward the departure bay, and I did not walk ahead of him, and he did not walk behind me. We walked at the same pace, on the same line, watching the same light.